Welcome to the 2020 Bronx Book Festival. You're listening to Unbreakable Time. Our moderator is P. Djèlí Clark. P. Djèlí Clark is the author of the novellas The Black Dodge Drums, winner of a 2019 Alex Award from the American Library Association, The Haunting of Tramcar 015, and A Dead Gin in Cairo. His short stories have twice made the Locus recommended reading list and have appeared in online venues such as Fireside Fiction, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Heroic Fantasy Quarterly, and in-print anthologies including Griots, Hidden Youth, and Clockwork Cairo. He is loosely associated with the quarterly Fire, a magazine of Black speculative fiction, and has been a reviewer at Strange Horizons. He currently resides in New England and ruminates on issues of diversity and speculative fiction. Djèlí, the stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel for the Bronx Book Festival. Thank you guys for helping put this together. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our panelists. So first up, we have N.K. Jemisin. N.K. Jemisin is the first author in history to win 3 consecutive Best Novel Hugo Awards, all for her Broken Earth trilogy. Her work has also won the Nebula, Locus, and Goodreads Choice Awards. She has been a reviewer for the New York Times Book Review and an instructor for the Clarion and Clarion West writing workshops. In her spare time, she's a gamer and gardener, and she is also single-handedly responsible, very important here, for saving the world from King Ozymandias, her dangerously intelligent ginger cat, and his phenomenally destructive sidekick, Magpie. How are you doing, Nora?
I'm good. Ozzy and Magpie are asleep. We're all safe.
Good to know. Next up, we have Victor Lavalle. Hello, Victor.
Hey, everybody. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Victor Lavalle is the author of 7 works of fiction and 1 graphic novel. His most recent novel, The Changeling, was named one of the 10 best books of 2017 by Time Magazine, USA Today, and the New York Public Library. It won the World Fantasy Award and the British World Fantasy Award, among others. He teaches writing at Columbia University and lives with his wife and 2 kids in Washington Heights. Glad to have you here. I know in these times. Next up, we have Alaya.
I'm sorry, cut off for a second there.
Sorry. Next up, we have Alaya Dawn Johnson.
Hi.
Hi. Alaya Dawn Johnson has been recognized for her short fiction and YA novels, winning the 2015 Nebula Award for Best Novelette for A Guide to the Fruits of Hawaii, which also appears in the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy of 2015, guest edited by Joe Hill. Her debut YA novel, The Summer Prince, was longlisted for the National Book Award for Young People's Literature. Her follow-up YA novel, Love is the Drug, won the Andre Norton Award in 2015. A native of Washington, D.C., Johnson is currently based in Mexico City, where she received a master's degree in Mesoamerican Studies and sings in a blues band.
That's new.
Next up, we have Tochi Onyebuchi. Tochi is the author of the young adult novel Beast Made of Night, which won the Noma Award for Best Speculative Fiction Novel by an African. He's also the author of its sequel, Crown of Thunder, and War Girls. He holds a BA from Yale, an MFA in screenwriting from the Tisch School of the Arts, a master's degree in economics from Sciences Po, and a JD from Columbia Law School. His fiction has appeared in Panverse 3, Asimov Science Fiction, Obsidian, Omanana Magazine, Uncanny, and Lightspeed. His nonfiction has appeared in Tor.com, Nowhere Magazine, the Oxford University Press Blog, and the Harvard Journal of African American Public Policy, among other places. Very credentialed. Riot Baby is his adult fiction debut. So, panelists, welcome again to our discussion of Unbreakable Time. So, the official description of this panel is speculative fiction and fantasy writers discuss their approaches to writing the past, present, and future in worlds that shift perspectives about where we've been and where we're going. And so as the moderator, I guess what I'll do is I'll ask you a few questions, but I'd love to just have us open this up and talk as we need to. We are having this panel in some unprecedented moments. And so if anyone feels the need to expand on the conversation, go beyond the question, vent, do as they wish, please feel free. I'd like us to have more of a conversation than me simply asking questions and coming back. And so please, let's make this a free-flowing discussion if possible. So I'll start with a question I have here since we're talking about time. I thought a place to start our discussion might be talking about setting. So often when we talk about setting and writing, we're talking about place and space, right? But time is also important. We make those choices for it. So as writers, I just want you guys, if you could, talk about how do you go about choosing the moment in time you want to explore in your world? What brings you to that moment in time when you are deciding to create your world, when you're drafting it, when you're thinking it up, when you finally get it together? What pulls you towards those moments?
Do you want to just like free for all it, or you want to pick somebody to respond, or how do we do this?
Nora is
Rock, paper, scissors. Sure. The story dictates what period of time I need to write it in. It's not really always a conscious choice. I did a short story many years ago called The Effluent Engine, which is set in antebellum New Orleans. And I just, like, when I thought of the story that I wanted to tell, it was driven partly by the fact that I kind of put in like a fanfic version of, oh my gosh, Norbert Rilliot, I think is his name, who was a real historical figure, and I may have mangled his first name. Anyway, so I had to set it kind of within a period that would work for his lifetime, and that drove the story. It was meant to be a steampunk story about Haitian independence, New Orleanians fighting back against slavery in various ways, and discrimination even as freed people, and so on. So I mean, the choice is driven by like what is the character, what are the characters, and what is the story that I'm trying to tell. It's not a thing that I pick.
Anyone else want to jump in there?
Yeah, no, after you. Yeah, right.
Alaya?
Okay, well, I tend to either want to go to like the past or the future, like the extreme future or the extreme past. Like the present I find really complicated to deal with. Maybe it's kind of, like really painful or something sometimes, especially with the themes that I tend to deal with, so it's like I link that kind of distance you get from dealing with other times that aren't my time. But then it turns out that that's not, it maybe sort of gives me enough like breathing room in order to be able to imagine different things. That's what I like about working in the future. Like in my science fiction novels, I love that space of being able to imagine a different society. One with perhaps different problems, but kind of explicitly like having solved some of the problems of our current society. I think I like that that optimistic space while still providing, obviously lots of conflict. The past is a little harder, I guess, for me, but it's a space I keep coming back to. The novel I have coming out in July, Trouble the Saints, is like set in 1942 in New York, like right before the U.S. enters World War II, and it was very much me like trying to figure out like my parents and grandparents in a lot of ways, like what their stories were, trying to kind of get back and reimagine that space, because it seemed to me so clear that it was so deeply informing the world in which I lived, and yet it was time and a place where like my parents and grandparents like didn't talk about it as much, or like they didn't get into like the kind of details that I was maybe more interested in. So like I think there's a lot of maybe kind of personal history that goes into which setting I pick,
Yeah.
Anyone else? I see Tochi has his hand up. Yeah.
Can't get away from the classroom. No, I really a lot of what you were saying just now like resonated with me in part because with regards to the personal aspect or the personal connection to a time in which a story is set, part of my reasoning for setting Riot Baby when I did, and particularly beginning the story when I did, was because of my personal connection with having grown up, during the Rodney King uprising and like having seen that and that being one of the very first sort of political memories that I remember having developed. Like it was the first time where I would watch the news and know that like something important was happening. And I mean, for any number of obvious reasons that resonated with, the moment in which I started writing Riot Baby like 5 years ago. And, unfortunately is resonating once again with the moment that we're in now. But, with regards to the issue of time in Riot Baby, it's sort of like what you were talking about, that distance earlier. I've been chasing the reverse of that. Like I wanted a very sort of claustrophobic feeling in Riot Baby where you're trapped. And like, so I definitely feel as though there is that issue of distance that you can play around with, but you can go in one direction and get sort of, get this breathing room, but then you can also go in the other direction and just get to a point where, the story can suffocate you. And like, if it's done intentionally, it can be done well, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I would just add in there, like most of my fiction, almost all of it, has been just set in the contemporary, I guess it's a realist realm, in the sense at least that it's identifiable places that I've been, but that's largely because I think I grew up in Queens, and even though I have my mother's from Uganda, and she was well traveled, I think we got to Queens, and they kind of said like, you don't have to go anywhere else, like you can just hang out here, and I felt very, very provincial in that way, whatever you want to call it, like a rube in Queens. And it wasn't until I was like out of college that I realized I hadn't traveled any. And I hadn't really paid attention to the world in any way. And so at this point now, when I write, it's usually like I certainly write about New York, but I try to pick places I would like to see in the world and then go to those places. And in theory, I say to myself, I'm planning to write about this. So that's why I'm going, because I need research or whatever. But the truth is, I'm trying to get myself out of the little bubble of Queens, or now Washington Heights. And on some level, the only way I can make myself do things that are good for me is if I say it's for the work. I won't do it for myself if it's just going to be something I enjoy.
If you say it's for the what? Sorry, could you repeat that?
I'm sorry. If I say it's for the work, then I will let myself do these things, like travel to all these various places. But if I was to say I would just love to go to Antarctica, I won't go. But if I say,
but it's Antarctica.
Yeah,
then I will go.
It's the one place where there are no COVID cases.
Yeah.
No cops, none of that shit. I would love to go to Antarctica right now.
Utopia.
Until I show up.
Sure. And so it's really funny. I'm about to throw out the questions I have because you guys have given me some food for thought. And so let me go with one. And so I thought one thing interesting that a lot of you have brought up is this notion of, and I think especially Alaya and Tochi, that things that are happening in the present, right, end up in your work. So your work, whether it's talking about whether it's set in contemporary era, whether it's set in the past, whether it's set in the future, there's a way that much of it is talking about the now, right? And it seems almost simplistic. And yet when I'm a historian and when I teach students, I often have to teach them this notion that all historians are, in a sense, we're writing about the now, even if we're writing about the past. Or, well, I won't say the future. We don't do that in history, but we do it creatively, right? So if I'm writing about, for instance, the Civil War in 2020, someone's reading this book many, many years from now, something I wrote, what I wrote will tell them less about the Civil War than it will tell them about what someone from 2020 might think about the Civil War. And so if I expand that to creative writing, where you're also talking about the future, the present, the past, I'd like to know, as Tochi pointed out, that there were these certain things that influence you in writing, no matter what you write. Can you remember that a certain event, whether it was a larger national or global event or issue, or it was something more personal, if you're willing to share, that happened in a moment, influenced how you wrote about something, even if this thing was set in some far-flung future or the past or in some secondary world, how, those things that are happening in your present, you pull those into your work.
I mean, that was oh, no, after you.
And we really should play rock, paper, scissors.
You guys are the most polite panelists ever.
Or you're just too polite.
We should run a
probably
panel.
You pick.
So Nora, you were going to
Sure. Well, I was going to say that the Broken Earth books, which are not in anything resembling Earth, not our past, not our future, although people keep thinking that it's the future. I don't know why. But, so the Broken Earth books are in a complete secondary world, but they are influenced obviously by my understanding of how people work. And my understanding of how people work is influenced by my understanding of history and sociology and our world. And I ended up writing a good portion of the first book during the whole Ferguson uprising. And, so my anger and the same curdled feelings that I have right now, fed into that at that time, because I needed a place to put that anger, so that I would not just sort of sit on it and stew. It's not our world. It doesn't look like our world. It's got weird magic and rocks flying everywhere. But in there are lynchings, there are beatings, there is a police force that is out of control, that controls a lot more of society than just the oppressed group, because they've allowed it to get away with controlling the oppressed group. And of course, if you, as my grandmother used to say, if you are hell-bent on holding somebody down, you got to lie down there with them. All of that is that's in all my writing. I can't, it doesn't matter, because the shit keeps happening over and over. Oh, can I say shit? Well, too late. Anyway, but it keeps happening over and over again. That's part of the problem. That's part of the reason why there's such resonance with discussions of the redemption period after the Civil War and all this other stuff, because we're effectively still fighting that Civil War in 2020, because we never did anything to the people that instigated that war, and they raised their kids to instigate more wars, and here we are now. The resonances are there because we are living through history that has those resonances in it. And even if we're writing about something that isn't in our world, we are products of that world, and that's going to come through.
All right. I'm feeling all these things because I'm like, yes, I can think of several examples myself. Tochi.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it goes back to that sort of that interminability of human messed upness, or the fact that we will always be, or at least the powers that be will always insist on learning the wrong freaking lesson from a thing. And that was part of my experience with War Girls. It's a novel that's based on the Civil War that happened in Nigeria from 67 to 70. but it's set in like, 150 years into the future. And an interesting thing that was happening while I was writing it was that there was this sort of renewed secessionist movement happening in Nigeria at the time. And there was this separatist leader, and the police were after him and everything, and there were sort of calls for a new Biafra, and so much of it stems from that official and unofficial silence with regards to the war. Like, you don't really talk about it, and there's this whole idea after the war of no victor, no victim. Like, that was the official policy, is just, let's just keep it moving. Let's not address any of the underlying tensions or concerns or any of the reasons that this happened to begin with. Let's just keep going. And then you get to this point where people are like, we haven't had it, because there's supposed to be a rotating presidency based on, your tribe, your tribal affiliation. And people are like, we haven't had an Igbo president in decades, and there's a reason for that. And all these grievances that led to the war to begin with come back up. And I was like, I mean, that's that I think is, and also as a storyteller, I'm always looking for that friction that can generate dramatic tension. And that for me seemed like a hotbed for that sort of thing, but also a way to bring that issue back into the public consciousness. Like, I think people need to be talking about Biafra again, especially given how dysfunctional Nigeria is right now and has been for the last 50 years.
And you see this in so many societies, where you have that, I always kind of harken back to that MLK quote from the letter from a Birmingham jail, where he's talking about the peace that is the absence of conflict rather than the presence of justice, the negative peace that is the absence of conflict rather than the positive peace that is the presence of justice. As long as you have only negative peace, it's not going to last. And so many people are so quick to default to the negative piece because it's easy, because that's the status quo. And if we ever want to see our societies progress, we're going to have to actually attempt that positive peace at some point. And people just don't seem willing to figure that out. It's not really that hard to understand, but folks got to be hard-headed.
Whose dog is that? I think should be like me. Should be the defining term of this age. I didn't know that. Alaya or Victor, did you have anything to add to that discourse on?
Yeah, I was listening to what you guys were talking about, like these echoes in history, especially Djèlí, like what you were talking about, how you study history and you can learn as much about what the time period the person is living in who wrote that history as you could about the time period they're supposedly writing about, and I think I'd like to keep those sort of layers, or I kind of keep them kind of in mind, I guess, as much when I'm researching as when I'm writing, I'm writing from a really specific time period, but I think a lot of what inspires me is also this knowledge of the extent to which history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Like, we're really rhyming. It's kind of simplistic and extreme, the extent to which we're rhyming right now. And I think that's something that kind of continues to really hook me as a writer. It's something that I feel like I just keep going back to. So if I write science fiction, I always end up writing science fiction with 500 years of historical backstory in which the characters are constantly referring back to the times that they're repeating that eventually go back to arc present. And when I write about the past, I'm really thinking about that. I think because part of it is that society, modern Western society, has this very faulty progressive notion of history, so that we are always in some ways the people at the apex of understanding. And so you end up with a lot of things like, how in 2020 are we? And I'm like, listen guys, in some ways in 1920 they were way more progressive about this shit than we are now. It's it depends on the access and the kind of conversation we're having. I mean, and certainly in terms of you know, the stuff we're protesting and the kinds of insights we have. I mean, you read Black writers from the 1920s, again, like they're really not saying shit that's extremely different. Like, you know, there might be different ways of saying it or different modes of expression, but it's not, you know, wholly reinvented right now. And that's part of the tragedy, you know, and that's actually part of what I think makes, you know, it's what makes historical fiction really resonant, I think, sometimes, when you could go back and say, oh no, this wasn't, we're actually like experiencing this in a different way, but it's not a wholly different experience either. And that was
Excuse
something
me,
like
UPS delivery. I'll be right back.
Yes, UPS strikes again.
There was a kind of, you were talking about like what, like a formative experience. This isn't exactly like a historical event. I just remember so vividly this moment when I was in US history in high school and we got to the Civil War, and my teacher, you know, was in a lot of ways a very good teacher, but he was very much of this proponent of the Civil War wasn't about slavery. And you know, and like, I'm sure you guys all know, I mean, it's just like, I don't know, bizarre, like chasing their own tail documents to justify it. I mean, it's just like, it was like, sure, you know, it's about slaves' rights, about states' rights to own slaves, you know, like, sure. But I, you know, I was in high school and I was like, well, that seems weird, but okay, let me like run with this and like see why it is that you think that it's not, you know, but it just always seemed really weird. Like I just felt really gaslit, but I didn't know that word. And then I remember, like, I went to college and I read more, and I, for some reason, was assigned at the school newspaper, like, horribly write a profile on Ann Coulter. It's like, and then, yes,
Who did that to you?
I know. I don't even. I can't explain how this happened. So I kind of read up
getting worse
on Ann Coulter, and so this was when she'd had this huge controversy about, you know, saying that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. It was just ridiculous, and I challenged her on it, and she was like, well, no, and I'm like, well, you know, like the South Carolina secession document, no, you know, just like all of these, because at that point I'd actually like looked up, and I realized like, oh, like even though my high school teacher and Ann Coulter seemed like extremely different, and they were not, I mean, like not even sort of on the same like wavelength politically or anything, like they were saying the same thing, and like the same BS, you know, it was just a total BS, but it had like infiltrated so deep into like the historical discourse or like historians' discourse in that time period that it was just sort of like spread out over everything, and it was a total lie. And I think that was kind of the moment where I thought to myself, because you know, you go back and you actually read people's statements and letters and books from that time period, and it's definitely about slavery. Like no one was under any illusions about this. Every single goddamn person in the U.S. knew it was about slavery. So it was just amazing to see people like take what someone in like, you know, 1870 understood, and then in 1960 you read what they were writing about, and then you're like in 1998 you read what they're writing about, and it's like they're using the same base of documents, but they're having a completely different experience of it. And there's something about that moment that made me think I need to write about history. Like I need to like express a historical understanding that at least maybe, you know, I can't obviously like live there now, but I think what I'm trying to do is to get something that feels as complicated and real as the present and doesn't smash it the way a lot of those historical arguments do now, you know?
Yeah, no, that's I grew up in Texas, so I could tell you all about lost cause theory.
I went to school in Alabama.
I see you've absolutely raised the stakes there.
We spent a year on Alabama history and a semester on world history, so that tells you everything you need to know.
Well, I'll say this, you know, Connecticut as the dark horse. I went to school where our textbook, and Mom showed me this a couple years back, she highlighted it. There was a line in the textbook that said, and I quote, "Nelson Mandela is a terrorist."
Oh,
So I will see your Texas and your Alabama.
Right? Yes. So Victor, to bring you into this part of the conversation, you know, when I read The Ballad of Black Tom, there was a way I remember when I'm reading it, and it's set in this era of Harlem in the early 1900s. And then I saw Supreme Alphabet in there, and I was immediately drawn to every hip hop album I'd listened to in the 90s, from Wu-Tang to Brand Nubian or something. And so in going back with this, I'm interested in how those aspects, I didn't know if that was something that drew from the present, that you decided to put into this work, even though it's set in the past. Was that somehow influenced in that way? Yeah.
Well, for me, like it was two things really. Like one was like that was my first sort of attempt at historical fiction, right? And I definitely felt like it was a way to talk about. It was 2015, I think, when I was writing that, and sort of like what Nora was saying, like just seething with this anger over what I was seeing over that summer, let alone all the other summers. But and figuring how can I fit this into a story. But one of the things, one of the things that is like the big traps for people who write Lovecraft pastiche is that they try to sound like Lovecraft, like back then, right? Like and even when he was writing it, he was trying to sound not like the 1920s, but like the 1890s. Right. So you say like you're going even farther back with that, and so I just decided I'm not gonna be that historically sort of bogged down, right? I'm just gonna write it in a much more contemporary way. But then when I was like working through the book, I was trying to figure out like the character Tommy I felt like he needed the book needed a magic system that could rival the Necronomicon or whatever else, and I felt like, well, Lovecraft's entire system on some level is a form of white supremacy, like put into books, right? And so I wanted to battle it with essentially black supremacy, right? Which was, to me, the Nation of Gods and Earths. Like one of the great joys of my life in the 80s of hip hop was standing around, entering into a cipher, and then somebody just saying like, do you know you are God on earth? The black man has got right. And acknowledging in here, the black woman got pretty short shrift in the Nation of Gods and Earths. But there was this way that my head kind of blew off when he just said, you as a black man are God. And with time, I feel like, okay, I see the ways that's self-serving, that's a form of vanity, blah, blah, blah. But there was also a way I realized, like, oh, when like old white guys with beards go and see the Sistine Chapel, they literally get the same message. Like every time they look up, you are God, right there. And if you're a younger white guy, you will eventually, as long as you grow your hair out, and have a beard, you will also become God. Right? I'm just thinking like how powerful that is.
That explains in like 30 seconds why so many old white dudes in science fiction turn into these bearded Merlin-looking wannabe. Oh, you have explained so much right there.
What's hilarious here, I'm thinking of the graphic novel Persepolis. And in it, the character says when she would close her eyes, she would always imagine God as a bearded guy, but then her parents were Marxists, and so she would get God and Marx confused. White men with long beards, and that's all I was thinking of.
Oh, I love it.
No, but I think that's great. They haven't told me yet we're on the other part, so I'm going to keep going. But that's a great segue for me because it's actually something that came up when. From all the things, I think it was Tochi brought up Antarctica, and we started joking like, "We'll go to Antarctica. There's no police there, right? And there's no COVID." And so, and then Victor, you're talking about the Nation of Gods and Earths and their notion of even with all their problematics, and there's a lot of problems that, of course, they have, and this notion of trying to battle, and the problems they have is that they're trying to battle white supremacy, right? And they've come up with the only thing they can possibly think of in their minds anyway, that, well, if you say that white people in the sense that God is in this image, I'm going to flip that, right? And I will battle this by saying, here we are. And there's a way that they're creating their own type of Black utopia, right, in doing so. And so I'm wondering, as writers, do you, and I'm thinking of things like Wakanda, for instance, right? It's more of a more futurist type of Black utopia. Then you had, we're going back to the 80s and 90s, Afrocentrism would find these utopias in the Black past, right? And all of them are fictive in their own ways, right? They're all fictions in a sense, but they're all set in these different eras of time. And so I'm trying to formulate a question here. If you see, I'm trying to let it bubble up. And this notion of, is there a place within our writing for this sense of a Black utopia, especially if we're looking at where we are now? I often have people ask me, is there writing beyond the pain? Is there writing beyond all of these problems? Can we imagine something else that's different where we aren't dealing with these problems? Is that possible, or is that type of escapism not something that maybe we should fall into? And I'm curious what you guys think.
I think it's definitely. Oh,
in our utopia, everyone will talk at once.
Exactly.
At once.
I got off the starting blocks first.
Go ahead.
No, but I just, I just want to take this moment to shout out Pet by Akweke Emezi, because I think it gets at exactly that type of thing where we can imagine worlds absent certain oppressive structures. I think, particularly along the vector of gender, like J.Y. Yang's novellas come to mind as well. I do think that it's possible. At the same time too, like as a storyteller sort of constantly chasing conflict, I think of Genosha, and I think of Genosha as a place where persecuted people go to. It's not necessarily, it's a utopia out of necessity. And I'm always drawn to that necessity aspect of it. It's something that you have to defend. You're running away from forces that are trying to kill you in order to get to this place or to create this place. And you'll defend it tooth and nail. Fast forward to House of X and Powers of 10, where like that to me was an incredible encapsulation of, I think, some of what you were getting at, in that it's the moment, I think, in the X mythos where it flips and you have mutants acknowledging their position as gods, as superior beings. Like, we're not going to be this hunted population anymore. It's like, there's that panel where Magneto turns around and he goes, "You have new gods now." And like that to me was such a seminal moment. And so it was the ending of Watchmen for me. And so I think that I think it is entirely possible to imagine worlds absent oppressive structures. I find it easier to imagine those utopias existing in a place that wants to destroy them. Like that, like I just can't sort of get outside of that conception. But like I think
Black
those
Wall Street, one would say.
Exactly like Black Wall Street, or Rosewood, that sort of thing. These utopias have existed, like they've actually existed historically, but for obvious reasons they have not been allowed to persist.
Nora, did you have, or anyone else?
I was just thinking about the fact that the difficulty of imagining a utopia free of the various oppressions that we are so used to is why I decided to write. What the hell is the name of that damn story that I wrote? I can never remember the names of my own stories. The Ones Who Stay and Fight, which was a response to Le Guin's The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas.
Yeah.
And I struggled because, like, the reason I decided to write it was because I was like, I can't imagine a utopia. I can't imagine a utopia that's not like in imminent threat of immediate of destruction at all times, or where we've managed to come up with this idea of black male supremacy, but black women get short shrift. Like there's always going to be something fucked up there. And I tried to kind of at least decide, all right, so what if we imagine a society where the one thing that is fucked up is the tendency to hate and the tendency to restructure societies in the shape of hate. And so, I ended up writing a society which felt like a dystopia, which felt like a utopia to me, except it's got that note in there of like the social workers or the people who are tasked with sort of taking care of that society kill people who imagine that some people are better than others. And I'm like, if you've got to have this, if this is, human history suggests that there's some aspect of us, I don't, subscribe to the fictional idea that Butler suggested of us being innately hierarchical. I don't know if that's something she believed or that was just fiction, but there's something in us that seems determined to do this. So whatever that is, let's try and channel it in a way that's going to at least do the least harm or reduce harm. And so that was just the way that I decided to deal with it.
I don't know if anybody else had anything else to add to that.
But I mean, I actually wrote a novel with a matriarchal kind of black utopia, but it was a complicated utopia, right? Like that was kind of how I thought of it in my head. Ended up, because it was YA, the summer print, so it ended up kind of getting popularly classified as dystopian. But I mean, I never thought of it as dystopian. It was, I mean, really, frankly, the city of Palmares Tres and that novel is it's a pretty cool place to live, but it's got problems. I think, as Nora was saying, like it's hard for me to imagine a society, even that on some axes is doing things a lot better and does not have the sorts of oppressions that we are living with, that wouldn't still have other problems, and other kind of ways that kind of, because even if it's trying to grow in new soil, it still has to kind of deal with its past, is kind of how I set it up. And so that society has been sprung out of, nuclear war and plague. And so there was a lot of kind of like modern society breaks down, except instead of we all shoot each other and eat each other, it's sort of we construct something beautiful from the ashes. And that was, I mean, part of the reason why I made it was literally just to try to imagine something very much rooted in the African diaspora and very beautiful. Like that was very much like I just wanted to celebrate that. But then it was like the second I started to write it, it was like class differences and who lives at the bottom of the pyramid and who lives at the top, because it's literally like a pyramid. So that got kind of obvious. But I sometimes I really like that in science fiction, where you just get to really like push your metaphors in a more literal way. But it's but all the things that you guys are talking about is this kind of stuff that was just sort of like constantly going through my head, and as I was trying to construct it, like, I guess maybe you wouldn't write a novel if there was no conflict, right? So that's part of it, but it's also just what kind of conflict really moves me. And so in that novel, there's also like an incidence of extreme police violence that sets off like a major political change, So just it's like I couldn't get away from it, even though I was trying to get away from it.
So I don't know if you want to add something to Victor. Yeah.
Sure. Maybe just that, like I'm kind of I'm really appreciating and enjoying the ways that everyone is talking about how they did try to imagine some version of utopia, some sense of that, right? Because it feels like so. I guess all I've been thinking about is I've been like just being raised by my mother, my grandmother, two very cynical Ugandan women who lived through two different dictatorial regimes, through Milton Obote and then through the famous Idi Amin, right? Even though Milton Obote was worse. according to them, right? I didn't live through it. But I remember like their take on things was like they used to, when I was a kid, sometimes we would sit around, we're watching a show or something, and they might start debating like who was better, which was worse, Obote or Amin, right? And they would list the sort of horrors, right? Like, well, this one did this and this one did that. And you remember when Amin set all the girls on fire in front of their school, and you remember this and this, and all this. And then they would just sort of end it with like, my grandmother would say, but at least Amin was funny, right? And that was like the best you were going to get out of this world.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
But at least Amin what?
She said, at least Amin was funny.
How's he get out of there?
He had a sense of humor. And to them, like that was the best you could get. And then they deeply loved when he offered to become the King of Scotland on TV, on the news. When he said, I saw you needed a king, I'm available. And so they were sort of like, that's the best you're getting out of this world is a funny, murderous dictator.
Wow.
And as a result, all I'm trying to say is like the concept that there was room for utopia is so far outside my thinking. I'm like truly like joyous to hear us all talking about that as a part of things, even as I love the bleak humor, the deeply bleak humor of my grandma and my mom, as on the other side.
Shit, and we can't even get a funny murderous dictator.
Yeah.
Right.
At least funny in some way.
Lord, let me not be jealous.
Coherent at this point.
So we're at the point where we're going to turn to some audience questions. And I think the audience questions, interestingly, we've touched on a bit of it. And people can open up and see who they want to do. We have about 3 audience questions. And so the first one, during tough times such as these, how do you devote yourself to speculative fiction that moves you to write?
I don't. I've been reading nothing but fanfic and I am reading some like forthcoming novels so that I can blurb them, mostly because I promised to do that before all this started. And so, I think of that as work. I don't think of that as like, these aren't books that are available right now. So these aren't things that I would have picked up like on my own. But yeah, right now I'm reading like other mediums entirely. I'm not reading. I'm reading fanfic. I'm reading, if anything, comic books, and playing a whole lot of video games, and that's it. Apologies if you hear a yowl. It is dinner time for the cats. Ozzy is here to inform me of this. And he is sitting beside me, giving me the stink eye right now. So he's gonna.
There's a Boston Terrier sitting on my feet, so
it's that time.
He has moved his bed all the way from 2 rooms away to sit.
Oh, that's a big hint.
Yeah, that's a statement. That's very emphatic.
So beyond our pets, so anyone else? How do you devote yourself, or do you find a way to devote yourself to some type of speculative fiction that moves you during time?
I treat it like a job. I think that's been the big thing for me, sort of getting through and like part of this too is the closest example for me, growing up was my mom. Immigrant woman, widow, raised 4 kids, just literally always going. And like, granted, she like had a support system and all of that I didn't really see as a kid and wouldn't really know until I got older. But for me, one of the things that keeps me going is actually the work.
Get off.
And like and the writing and the learning how to write better and like the craft of it. Just like I have a deadline to meet. Like let me sit down and do this project. And I've generally found through some alchemical process that when I get out on the other side of that, I'm feeling better.
Your writing always makes me feel better, but convincing myself to do it is like I need to turn like winter shins under the full moon, or I'm like smudging my. I need to like do something because it's gotten kind of hard, guys. I mean, how do you do it? I keep trying. Eventually, like that works.
Mm.
I write a lot that's horrible.
Mm.
And then I say, oh, that at least I wrote words, now I have to rewrite them. Like it's a lot of just sort of trying to trust myself that I have something that's worthwhile to say, which I don't know about you guys, but like when everything just seems so just like conflagrations of like all kinds all at once. There's just so many people with so many better things to say than what I have to say, I guess it seems. And so it's hard to say, well, this is my small piece of it.
Yeah.
I've been, like for me, I've been, the two things I've been doing is like trying to tell myself, like whatever I'm working on now, I began before the last 3 months, by and large. And so I keep trying to tell myself, don't try to put now into it, like consciously, don't try to put it in, largely because, feeling like to Alaya's conflagration idea, like the thing is so big, I don't have perspective on it yet. And if I try to sort of come up with the thing right now, I feel like it's like even 2 months ago, I wouldn't have thought it would be where this is. So who knows what another 4 months is going to do, So I've just been sort of saying, I take notes on stuff. There might be, sometimes I feel like it kind of, like there's an energy that is going into the work as I'm revising stuff, but it's not like consciously trying to stick in. Suddenly there's a virus in this novel, right? Like I'm just working really hard to not do that to myself. And then also like really lowering the bar of what I expect of myself. Where before I might try to do a couple pages, now I feel like you got a page, put your hands up, walk away, play the video game, read the comic, play with the kids, whatever it is, maybe you've earned it, right? Yeah. Or even if you haven't earned it, you're going to do it.
Yeah, take those small victories where you got them.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. For sure.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I was just going to quickly say I'm actually writing a novel set in contemporary New York for the first time in my life, and I'm like, this is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever done. Like, do I put in the pandemic that won't be, do I put in the fucking uprising? I mean, like, I don't know.
It's historical fiction now. It's historical fiction.
It's an alternate universe fanfic. That's all.
Every day it becomes historical fiction.
I don't know what to do at this point. This is a problem. Like, life is outstripping my speed of imagining dystopias.
You're like, man, that wasn't dystopia enough.
Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. So the next question we have, I suppose, is more so about the great questions of diversity in science fiction.
Can you be more specific?
So I will read the question as it is. There aren't that many Black science fiction writers being published these days. What do you think needs to be done for there to be more of us published?
I don't know that I agree with it. There aren't that many, like, relative to
expand, Nora, on your
compared to the past, there are quite a few. Compared to our actual representation within the readership, probably we are severely underrepresented still. But that is the question, is like, what is it that we mean by published, and what is it that we mean by here? Like, there's a shit ton of Black writers in self-publishing. There's a metric ton of Black writers in comics publishing. It's just like where are you talking about? And like, if everybody's talking about traditional publishing and folks who win Hugo Awards and all that other stuff, okay, that's one thing to sort of discuss. But like, there are like, even over the 20 years or so, the 15 or 20 years that my career has expanded, the number of Black writers has exploded exponentially. Like, when I first started, there really, people just talked about 5. Delaney Hopkinson Barnes. They didn't really talk about Tananarive for some reason. I don't know what was up with that. But Tananarive do. And I'm missing somebody? Oh, shit, I am. But anyway, I don't remember who. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah,
Good Lord, how did I do that? Oh, wow. Okay, clearly I have not had enough sleep in the last few days. But so basically,
stage now for what you've done.
Well, I'm gonna have to do penance. But yeah, so when I first started, there were like 5 that anybody even mentioned, and there were a whole bunch of people like me who were like wannabes, but who couldn't break in. Now there's several hundred, probably. There's dozens that I could think of off the top of my head. You know, I did a roll call on Twitter about maybe 6 months ago, where I was like, you know, if you are a writer who is publishing in whatever form, be that self-publishing, be that whatever, post something here, and you know, this is the signal boost place. And when I stopped even following that thread, there were like hundreds of responses there. So to answer the actual question of like what could be done to increase our numbers, well, fixing publishing will make a huge difference. Increasing the number of editors and agents and so on, who are more inclusive and more representative of the audience that is reading and buying these books. That's the obvious solution. So I'll stop there.
Oh, that's great.
And all God's people said amen.
Let the congregation say amen. So, anybody else, I don't know if Tochi or Lee or Victor wanted to address the question a bit more? If you had anything to add to that, or has Nora left the mic on the floor? How are we going?
Oh,
no, I mean, I think
everything
that Nora said, I just, you know, just one perhaps paradoxical bit of optimism from me. I think also too, one marker of progress is that, so I was very fortunate to have been able to publish an essay earlier today on the 1st of June about
that essay.
I have no mouth and I must scream. And it's fantastic, a reference
essay.
Thank you. It's a reference to an old Harlan Ellison story, and it's basically about being a Black writer in the current moment, specifically in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing. And it's about race, and it's in a speculative fiction outlet. And it's the type of thing that I don't know I would have seen 5 years ago. Like when I was writing Riot Baby for the first time, I don't know that I would have seen a journalistic publication put out an essay for an audience that has on more than one occasion proven itself sort of very hostile to discussions of race. And so the fact that this is happening, I think, is a big marker of progress, and I hope is only the first of many, many, many more instances of publications in the genre and venues in the genre lending their platform to people with these voices.
All right. That's a very good point. Very good point. Does anyone else have, or should I go on to the third question, or any more comments? Okay, I'll go on to the third question, which interestingly is aimed at Tochi, but I'm going to try to expand it a bit. The question itself is: Riot Baby is essentially happening right now, right? And I'll expand that by saying I think everyone here has work so that they can say that what is happening right now can tie into something that they've written. It's a scary time to be alive. Any encouraging words you can provide, as we are all hella angry. Brothers from the West Coast, hella angry right now.
I would just say, don't be afraid to write angry. I mean, part of the reason that I felt I was able to pull Riot Baby off was because I read the 5th season. And and I felt the anger in that story, and it was so well like done and put together, and like vibed so strongly with what I was feeling at the time that I read it. And I was like, wait a second, you can do this. You can do this. Wait a second, you can do this. And so like that, I think, really opened me up to this idea that I could write legitimately how I was feeling in this story about people with superpowers. So I think like, if there was any sort of advice in particularly with regards to getting through this current time, it's like, don't be like, your feelings are valid when you put them in your story. Like that's, you like, go for it.
Thank you. That's wonderful to hear, by the way. Right now, ask me in a week, maybe I'll be able to say something encouraging. I got nothing right now. I'm not in a good place. And I think that's okay. I think that we should allow ourselves to have a moment and just try to chew on what is happening around us. That is partly my father, who is a visual artist, his stuff in the background that you can't really see very well, but my father, when he asked me not to go to the protest nearby because he was afraid, and we're kind of each other's only remaining real family, and he doesn't want to lose me, and I get that. He reminded me that your job as an artist is to bear witness and to reflect and amplify. So your job is to absorb what is happening in this moment and give that back to the public, remind people, keep them from forgetting, all of that. So that is what I am trying to concentrate on right now. It's hard. It is a hard job. It is not as hard as those people who are out there putting their bodies on the line. But it is an important job too, and allow yourself that.
Alaya, if you had something.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I wrote a novel that is like the one novel I tried to write in kind of modern times. It was supposed to be sort of like 2 minutes in the future. Apparently it was 5 years in the future, because it was about a global flu pandemic, and all about, it was a very, very Washington, D.C. kind of story about its kind of intense race and class divides, and how healthcare disproportionately was very, very badly distributed, and it was disproportionately affecting the Black community in DC, and to see that stuff kind of come out. But of course, I wrote that before Trump, so it's like that novel has kind of morphed into something kind of vastly bleaker, frankly, than what I had even imagined. And I had not considered that to be like a particularly hopeful sort of a book. I'm not sure. I mean, I really hear what Nora's saying about our job, an important job being to sort of sit with this and come up with a way to amplify it, to synthesize it, to like to bring art out of it, which I do not think I'm really capable of right now. I think it's kind of right. Obviously, there's all sorts of, to the extent to which this is just an even bigger version of things that have already been happening before. I have some thoughts, but on the other hand, I feel the scale has kind of gotten to a point where I'm sort of sitting back and just watching, and of course I'm watching from another country. I'm in Mexico now, and that's also a whole other layer, a strange layer of identity, of being an immigrant, of looking back at my home country, of like really feeling so much solidarity with my people, but also, it's kind of guilt of not being there. And I'm not really sure what to do with all of that. So it's sort of, yeah, I don't know about advice really. It's just sort of what we're living through, and the pandemic hasn't gone away either, so it's all gonna keep coming.
Yeah.
The waves of the pandemic, the waves of this bitter fruit we've sown. Not us really, but the society we forced to live in.
Yeah.
It's just and then on every level really, it's on a countrywide scale, the US and the fruits that it's sown in the rest of the world, the US and the fruits that it's sown with all of its minority populations, indigenous and Black people especially, the way that in families, the way that trauma has been rained down from one generation to the next. I mean, it's just like everything is coming together at once. And the more it accretes, the more everything else I think is just going to start rolling in on it. And I don't know where it ends. I think part of what I'm looking at now is this kind of feeling of being a storyteller and wanting to know what the story is. But I don't know. I'm like, I keep reading the news like, well, now am I going to get to the end of the story? But I don't know. Like, the news is not telling me. We just have to wait. I think that's, but we're making the story too. That's what I have to believe.
I would just add in, I feel like it's been so well said all around, but just constantly remembering the ways that maybe like across the world, but thinking of the U.S. in particular, I'm thinking of the other point that Alaya brought up earlier about the teacher and the Civil War, that like the nation as it exists now is a memory wiping machine, right? And that the point of this nation and the way that this nation manages to sort of just barely keep the lid on the pot is that it keeps a year passes, 5 year passes. I would not be surprised if, like, especially this last week, in 5 years, there will be videos and tributes talking about, like, I remember when Black people and white people came together to protest against what happened with George Floyd. And we held hands, and peace was across the land.
Yep, it's coming. It's coming.
Nothing bad happened. It's coming, and it is but it is like the. I always one of the to make an obligatory Stephen King reference is the horror, as from the horror writer perspective, right? One of the most brilliant things I thought he came up with in his 11/22/63, I think it was, novel, was this idea that you can't go back and change time if you go back in time, because time doesn't want you to change it. It wants things to go the way it has made things go. And if you go back there, so like the character, he's walking down the street, he's about to go tell, let's say, JFK, hey, you shouldn't go to Dallas. And he's just walking down the street, and a garbage truck will just appear out of nowhere and plow into right where he was about to step. And there's no one in the wheel. And in real life, they'd say, I left the garbage. The driver would say, I left it in drive and I got out by mistake. I'm sorry. But the idea of the story is that time is trying to stop you from making things better, whatever that means. And I really feel like to go back to what Nora was saying, like I don't know if it makes people feel better, but the idea that if we don't, all of us, put down in some way or another the testament of what was going on, that's, I mean, the number of people, it's a joke now, the number of conservatives who say, I really wish we had MLK back because he was a guy I would have followed. And you killed him. You killed him.
You shot him in the face.
Ideology killed him.
But yes.
Blood pressure.
Yes.
And you are the ideological inheritors of the Southern Redemption that wanted nothing to do with them. Wanted now.
That's right.
And when he was alive, 80% of white people hated him. So no.
That's right.
No, I don't want to
But
hear
But the ones who say it now, they mean
classic.
it. Yes. But I think in the current moment, it will happen again, except for, all of us in the various ways that we are bearing witness, and maybe for us as writers, it's on that page.
That's a profound point.
For other people, it's what they did out in those streets. I mean, just to restate what Nora was saying earlier. Really.
So I think this is the only question I'll enter into, this notion of trying to give encouraging words. I'll talk about, everybody remembers the Amadou Diallo trial and verdict. And that was always one of those things that stuck with me. I think I watched when the verdict came down, and I was so angry when that verdict came out. I immediately sat down and I started writing a story, right? And that was my way of coping with it. And I wrote a whole, like, that anger sustained me for several months because I wrote an entire novel. The novel is unpublished. It's sitting somewhere. It's just for me. It is a novel of revenge and vengeance and African gods returning and smiting all kinds of people in New York City.
I don't know. The streets kind of need this,
right? And
the streets might need this.
It is a wild. It's a wild story, but I mean, it was basically what I did. Where I got that from was Chuck D of Public Enemy. There's a song called "Welcome to the Terror Dome," and he has a line on there: "When I get mad, I write it down on the pad." Right, and that's basically what I did. That's where I channeled my anger. Not everyone can do that, and everyone needs to do that, should do it, but it helped me channel what I was feeling. And maybe what you write at the time might be garbage, or maybe it's something that is just for you, or you may not want to put out in the world, or you may want to, right? But that was the way that I found I found an outlet in that way. And I'm not finding that right now. Right now, I more so want to write stuff that has nothing to do with any of that. I want to more escape into a semi-utopian type fantasies where they're battling other things that have nothing to do with these battles right now. But everyone has their way, and so that's the most I can think of in talking and offering encouraging words to show those different perspectives of how I've dealt with these types of moments in the past. Because these type of moments, like when Diallo happened, they're going to happen again. Unfortunately, like you're saying, I don't know when the story's going to end, and we're going to have these moments again. When Diallo happened, I thought, well, there's not going to be another moment that bad, and I've had so many moments that bad, I can't even keep them all in my head. Right? It's like I don't even have enough anger to give to each of them. And so that's where I'm going to leave off in our panel.
It's very apropos of the times.
Yes.
I just want to tell you, please, if you're a writer, create. We need you at the time. We need your voices and we need your thoughts. So please keep doing it. The system or what have you wants you to be defeated and not do those things. So fight back against it, resist it by doing so. And so are there any last parting words? Because we're at the end of this fabulous panel.
My cats are both sitting here looking at me. So I got nothing other than I will feed you in a minute.
I just want to say really quickly, like, I feel like one of the young guns, and I just want to say what an honor it is to be a part of this panel. Nora, your books have just like, it's the effect that they've had on me is indescribable. Victor, I literally taught the Ballad of Black Tom to my students this past semester. So like the fact that like I get to talk to you right now is just blowing my mind. Alaya, I cannot wait to get to Trouble the Saints. And yo, Djèlí, you already know what the deal is. So like, but if, like, this is, I'm just really grateful right now to be able to have this conversation with y'all. So thank you.
Definitely. I mean, I want to say some of the same. Nora, I think I've told you before over probably some wonderful Vietnamese food. Or something.
I remember that.
I think when I read your 100,000 Kingdoms, I was like, okay, this has altered my entire perspective of what Black writers can do with fantasy. Right?
Oh my God.
What I was thinking fantasy was, it can be so much more. Victor, I have a novella coming out called Ring Shout. Ballad of Black Tom let me know I could write that. It was in my head and I didn't know if I could. And I read that and I said, oh yeah, I can do this. I can definitely do this. And so
I sent Irene the blurb on it. So
yo, everybody watching this, get Ring Shout.
So it's full circle. Everything's coming full circle.
It's not out yet, but you can pre-order probably.
Thank you. And so Tochi, definitely, I love like you're out there just creating all this stuff, and I'm like, with all those degrees, even My God, I don't even know how to do it all. I'm worried about my little 1 degree.
I'm just Nigerian. That's just what it is.
And Alaya, thank you for being here. I have your book, and I can't wait. It's sitting there, and it's like my little treat that I want to go to Juju in
It's really good.
America and everything. So please, and matter of fact, can you tell everyone the name of your book before you go? Your upcoming.
Trouble the Saints.
So can you say that again?
Trouble the Saints.
Yes. So looking forward
Out in
to
July.
Out in Lake
Very
July.
good. With a blurb from NK
With a
Jemisin.
blurb from NK Jemisin.
Nice.
So yes, so great stuff. And of course, Tochi has Riot Baby out. Nora, your work on, you've expanded that wonderful short story on the city into
the city we became.
Yes. Nora came ready.
No, I just finished my online book tour,
That's
so
it.
all the props are here.
That's great.
Mhm.
And so I want to thank all of you for being part of this panel. I know it's hard during this time to come together and do this, but this was actually good for me. I kind of needed this in quarantine time, sitting here and then watching everything playing out. I'm hoping that it's going to be good for others as well to see this. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for Tanisha and Doris at the Bronx Reading for putting this together.
This has been fun, and it's an honor to be on a panel with all of you.
Truly,
we are changing things, so feel that energy. That energy.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay. So great to see all of you guys.
Everybody, then be safe and be well.
All right.
We're going to stop recording.
Truly grateful.
Okay.
All of you.
Thanks, y'all. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.